Commander Vextar's forearms moved slowly as he adjusted his battle-worn armor in front of the mixed group of young alien soldiers. The old warrior's shell bore deep scars from countless fights across the galaxy, each mark telling a story of survival against impossible odds. The War College's training room felt smaller tonight, packed with eager faces from a dozen different worlds. The lighting cast long shadows across the room, making Vextar's already intimidating figure look even more mysterious. His compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, scanned the crowd of cadets who had gathered to hear the legendary commander speak. Some were barely old enough to hold weapons, while others had already seen their first battles in the outer colonies. "Settle down," Vextar's voice rumbled through the room like distant thunder. The conversation stopped immediately. Even the most confident young warriors knew better than to interrupt when the old commander wanted to speak. He walked slowly between the rows of seats, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. "You've all heard stories about different species we've fought. The crystal beings from Andromeda who can phase through solid matter. The hive minds from the outer rim who think as one giant brain. The energy creatures who live in the hearts of stars." Several cadets nodded, remembering their basic training lessons about various alien threats. "But tonight," Vextar continued, stopping at the front of the room, "I'm going to tell you about something far more dangerous, something that keeps experienced generals awake at night, staring at star maps and wondering how they survived their encounters." A young cadet from the insect world of Kepler raised one of her 6 arms. "Commander, are you talking about the machine intelligences from the dead zones?" Vextar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "No, young one. Machines are predictable. You can understand their programming, find their weaknesses, exploit their logic. What I'm going to describe defies logic entirely." He turned to face a wall display that showed a map of known space. With a gesture, he highlighted a small yellow star near the galaxy's edge. "This is where they come from. Sol system. 3rd planet. From their sun. They call it Earth." The room fell completely silent. Even the ventilation systems seemed to quiet down, as if the building itself wanted to listen. "Humans," Vextar said the word like it tasted bitter. 5 feet to 6 feet tall. 2 arms, 2 legs. No natural armor, no claws, no venom, no ability to fly or breathe in space. By every measure we use to judge warrior species, they should be among the weakest in the galaxy. He paused, letting that sink in. Instead, they are the most terrifying opponents any of us have ever faced. Not because of their weapons, though those are advanced enough. Not because of their technology, though they innovate faster than any species we've encountered. They're terrifying because of something much simpler and much more dangerous. Vextar's voice dropped to almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean forward to hear him. They refuse to accept defeat. Even when logic, mathematics, and common sense all say they should surrender, humans keep fighting. They turn hopeless situations into victories through sheer stubborn determination. Commander Vextar's scarred hands trembled slightly as he activated the holographic display above the cadets. The 3-dimensional image showed Proxima Station, a small mining outpost floating in the darkness of space. It looked peaceful enough in the projection, but every veteran in the room knew the truth behind that innocent appearance. Proxima Station was supposed to be a simple operation, Vextar began, his voice carrying the weight of painful memories. "Our intelligence reports showed a skeleton crew of maybe 30 humans running basic mining operations. Easy target, quick victory, perfect training mission for our newer units." The hologram rotated slowly, showing the station's basic layout. Living quarters, mining equipment, communication arrays, nothing that suggested it could become the site of one of the most brutal battles in Coalition history. "And we sent 1,500 soldiers," Vextar continued. 3 full battle groups with heavy weapons and orbital support. Standard siege tactics called for surrounding the station, cutting off escape routes, and demanding surrender. Most species would have given up immediately when they saw our numbers. A young cadet from the reptilian Sauros system raised his clawed hand. "What went wrong, Commander?" Vextar's compound eyes focused on the young soldier. "Wrong? Nothing went wrong with our plan. The problem was that humans don't follow the same rules as everyone else in the galaxy." He manipulated the hologram to show Coalition forces surrounding the station, in perfect formation. Red dots representing alien soldiers formed a complete circle around the small mining facility. Captain Kim was in charge of the human defenders, 28 people total, including engineers and medical staff. When our commander sent the surrender demand, Kim's response was exactly 4 words: "Come and take it." The room buzzed with nervous energy. Every cadet had been taught that, outnumbered, forces should negotiate, retreat, or surrender to minimize casualties. Our assault began at dawn, station time, Vextar continued. We expected to breach the outer defenses within minutes. Instead, something unprecedented happened. Instead of hiding behind their defenses and waiting for us to break through, Kim's people came out to meet us. The hologram now showed the tactical replay. Blue dots representing humans moved in coordinated patterns that seemed to make no sense at first glance. "They attacked us while we were attacking them," Vexitar explained. But this wasn't a desperate suicide charge. Kim had studied our formation and realized something our own generals had missed. In our effort to completely surround the station, we had positioned our forces so tightly that we couldn't use our heavy weapons without hitting our own soldiers. Several cadets gasped as they understood the implications. The humans forced us into close combat in the station's corridors and maintenance shafts. Spaces so narrow that our size advantage became a disadvantage. Places where our advanced weapons were useless because the fighting was happening at arm's length. Vextar's mandibles clicked as he remembered the chaos of that day. Kim himself was shot 17 times during the fighting, 17 wounds that should have killed any rational being twice over. But he kept moving, kept directing his people, kept turning our own tactics against us. For 6 hours, 28 humans held off 1,500 coalition soldiers. The holographic display shifted to show a massive industrial complex floating in the asteroid belt. Kepler mining station looked like a mechanical spider, with long arms extending into the surrounding rock formations to extract precious metals and rare elements. It was designed for efficiency, not warfare, which made what happened there even more remarkable. After Proxima, our high command decided we needed to study human defensive capabilities more carefully, Vextar explained, his voice taking on a darker tone. Kepler mining station seemed like the perfect laboratory. It was isolated, had limited supplies, and housed only civilian workers. We planned a slow siege to observe how humans behaved under prolonged pressure. The commander's scarred face showed no emotion, but his hands clenched into fists as he continued. We surrounded the station and cut off all supply lines. Standard procedure. Most species would begin negotiating within days, seeking terms to avoid starvation. We expected detailed surrender proposals within a week. A cadet from the aquatic Cetian system bubbled a question through her breathing apparatus. "Did they try to negotiate, Commander?" Sergeant Park, the station's chief engineer, sent us exactly one message, Vextar replied. He thanked us for giving his people time to prepare proper defenses. That should have been our first warning that something was very wrong with our assumptions. The hologram zoomed in to show the station's industrial sections, massive plasma cutters designed to slice through solid rock, magnetic rail systems for moving ore, and fusion reactors that powered the entire operation. Within 48 hours, Park's team had transformed their entire mining operation into a weapons platform, Vextar continued. They repositioned the plasma cutters to face outward and began using them as long-range artillery. Each blast could cut through our heaviest armor at distances we thought were safe. Several cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had all been taught that industrial equipment couldn't be effectively weaponized without major modifications and proper military engineering. When we destroyed their main power grid, thinking we had solved the problem, Park's people did something. That defied every engineering principle we understood, Vexitar said. They hand-cranked their generators. Humans actually took turns manually powering their weapons, using nothing but muscle strength and determination. The room erupted in confused chatter. The idea of manually powering industrial equipment seemed physically impossible. "Silence," Vextar commanded. When we finally managed to destroy their backup generators, we thought the siege was over. Tow power meant no weapons, no life support, no resistance. We prepared for their surrender transmission. He manipulated the hologram to show the station's mining tunnels and ore processing areas. Instead, Park's team began launching chunks of processed metal at our ships, using magnetic rail systems powered by portable battery packs. They turned lumps of iron and titanium into kinetic weapons traveling at incredible speeds. Each piece of ore became a bullet the size of a ground vehicle. The display showed trajectory lines indicating how the improvised projectiles had damaged Coalition vessels. For 3 months, 26 humans held off our entire siege fleet using nothing but mining equipment and raw creativity. They survived on emergency rations meant to last 2 weeks by carefully calculating every calorie, sharing every scrap of food, and refusing to give up even when logic said they should have died weeks earlier. The atmosphere in the room grew, heavy as Commander Vextar's expression darkened. He unconsciously touched a jagged scar that ran across his chest armor, a mark that clearly hadn't healed properly, even after all these years. The cadets noticed the gesture and instinctively leaned forward, sensing that this story would be different from the others. Titan's moon was supposed to be a straightforward assault, Vextar began, his voice carrying a weight that made even the bravest young warriors uncomfortable. We had intelligence reports showing a small human medical facility built into the rocky surface. Field hospitals are traditionally safe targets in galactic warfare. Every civilized species in the Coalition respects medical neutrality. He activated another holographic display, showing a cross-section of the underground medical complex. Clean white corridors, patient rooms, surgical suites, and supply storage areas. It looked exactly like the peaceful healing centers found on dozens of Coalition worlds. Our battle plan was simple, Vextar continued. Secure the medical facility, treat it as a protected zone, and use it as a base of operations while we cleared the rest of the moon. Standard military doctrine says medical personnel don't participate in combat. They heal the wounded from both sides and stay neutral. A young cadet from the crystalline Quarian system chimed softly, "That's the foundation of civilized warfare, Commander. Medical neutrality protects everyone." Vextar's mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter laughter. "That's what I thought too until I met Corpsman Lee. She was a small human, maybe 5.5 feet tall, wearing medical scrubs under light armor marked with red crosses. When our forces breached the facility, I expected her to immediately declare non-combatant status and request protection for her patients." The hologram shifted to show the layout of the medical facility's main treatment area. Hospital beds lined the walls, with wounded human soldiers receiving care from a handful of medical staff. Instead, Lee looked at our assault team and said, "Something I'll never forget. You can't have them." She was referring to her patients, soldiers too injured to fight or evacuate. In our culture, those wounded would be considered prisoners of war, treated according to standard protocols. Vexitar's scarred hand moved to his chest again, tracing the old wound. Lee positioned herself between our soldiers and her patients, but she wasn't holding a surrender flag or medical identification. She had a plasma rifle in one hand and medical supplies in the other. The room fell completely silent. Every cadet understood that what they were hearing challenged everything they had been taught about the rules of warfare. "For 4 hours, I watched something that shouldn't have been possible," Vextar continued. Lee moved between her wounded patients, checking their conditions, adjusting their treatments, giving them medicine and encouragement. At the same time, she maintained accurate covering fire that kept my entire squad pinned down in the corridor. The commander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She would crouch beside a wounded soldier, check his bandages and give him water, then immediately turn and fire 3 precise shots at my position, then back to another patient to monitor his breathing and adjust his medication, followed by more covering fire that forced us to stay behind cover. Several cadets exchanged nervous glances, trying to imagine the scene Vextar was describing. 12 human soldiers survived that day because Lee refused to let us near them while they were helpless. But 37 of my comrades didn't make it home, because that same medic fought like a trained warrior while never once abandoning her duty to heal. The holographic display above the cadets shifted to show a complex 3-dimensional map of the asteroid belt, with thousands of floating rocks creating a maze-like battlefield Small icons representing ships moved through the space between asteroids, but the scene looked chaotic and confusing to the young alien warriors trying to follow the action. The asteroid campaign was our attempt to cut off human supply lines, Vextar explained, manipulating the display to highlight key positions. We positioned our command ship, the dreadnought Carthul, in the center of the belt, where it could coordinate attacks on human transport vessels. The ship was massive, heavily armed and protected by 6 escort cruisers. He paused the display, showing the impressive formation of coalition vessels. The command ship alone was 3 times larger than anything the humans had in the area, bristling, with weapons and shielded by advanced defensive systems. Lieutenant Cho's squad was assigned to a small reconnaissance vessel that happened to be in the area when we arrived, Vextar continued. 20 human soldiers in a ship barely larger than a shuttle, facing a battle group that could have destroyed entire planets. By all logic, they should have retreated immediately to report our position. A cadet from the insectoid mantis sector raised her forearm. "Commander, what did they do instead?" Vexitar's compound eyes focused on the display as he began the tactical replay. "They attacked, but not in any way that our military handbooks could explain or predict." The hologram came alive with movement. The small human vessel began weaving between asteroids, followed by 20 individual icons representing Cho's soldiers as they left their ship in powered armor suits. "Watch carefully," Vextar instructed. "This is where it gets impossible to understand." Cho's people spread out across dozens of asteroids, each soldier taking a different position. They had no way to communicate with each other that our sensors could detect. No radio signals, no laser communications, no quantum entanglement links. The display showed the human soldiers moving independently through the asteroid field, each taking positions that seemed random and unconnected. Our escort ships began hunting them down one by one, Vextar continued. "Standard procedure for dealing with scattered enemy forces. Pick them off individually before they can regroup." The hologram showed coalition ships pursuing the isolated human soldiers. Red flashes indicated when each human position was destroyed, and one by one, the blue icons representing Cho's people began disappearing from the display. But something strange was happening, Vextar said, his voice taking on an awed tone. Each time we destroyed one of their positions, the remaining humans would immediately change their own positions, not running away, but moving to new locations that somehow worked together, even though they couldn't possibly be coordinating. The tactical replay showed this eerie dance of death, with surviving humans constantly repositioning themselves in response to their comrades' destruction. As we eliminated more of Cho's soldiers, the survivors kept moving into a pattern that made no sense until the very end, Vextar explained. When only 5 humans remained alive, we suddenly realized they had maneuvered our ships into a perfect trap. The display showed the final moments. The surviving human soldiers had positioned themselves so that coalition ships chasing them were forced into a specific formation around the command vessel. Cho herself was the last to die. She detonated her suit's power core in a precise location. That caused a chain reaction through the asteroid field. The explosions created a debris storm that crippled our entire battle group. The hologram showed the devastating finale as chunks of shattered asteroids tore through coalition ships. 20 soldiers coordinated their own deaths to achieve victory. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Commander Vextar began his next story. His scarred hands trembled slightly, and for the first time since the lecture began, the veteran warrior looked genuinely afraid. The cadets noticed this change immediately, shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they sensed their instructor's deep unease. "The Battle of Europa ended with what we thought was a clean victory," Vextar began, his voice so quiet that everyone had to strain to hear him. "We had captured several human positions and taken a handful of prisoners for standard interrogation. Procedures. Intelligence gathering is a normal part of warfare. Every species we had ever fought provided useful information under questioning." He activated a hologram showing a standard coalition detention facility. Clean, well-lit cells designed to hold prisoners safely while respecting the basic rights established by galactic law. Nothing about the facility looked threatening or unusual. Private. Han was brought to Detention Block 7, Vextar continued. He appeared to be an ordinary human soldier, young, maybe 25 Earth years old, wearing standard infantry gear. His psychological profile suggested he would be cooperative under standard interrogation techniques. The hologram showed a detailed scan of the human prisoner. Average height, normal build, no cybernetic enhancements or unusual physical characteristics. To the alien cadets, Han looked completely unremarkable compared to the fearsome warriors Vextar had described in previous stories. Our first interrogator was Commander Zeklos, a specialist in psychological pressure techniques, Vextar explained. He had successfully questioned hundreds of prisoners from dozens of different species. The session was supposed to last maybe 2 hours, just long enough to gather basic tactical information. A young cadet from the aquatic Depthwalker clan raised a webbed hand. What went wrong, Commander? Vextar's mandibles clicked nervously. Nothing went wrong with our procedures. The problem was that Han wasn't just answering our questions, he was asking his own. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Prisoners weren't supposed to interrogate their captors. Within 30 minutes, Han had begun analyzing Zeklos instead of responding to questions. Vextar continued. He started asking about our military structure, our species' history, our cultural weaknesses. But he wasn't demanding answers. He was simply talking, sharing observations, making casual comments that somehow revealed he understood us better than we understood ourselves. The commander manipulated the hologram to show a recording of the interrogation session. 2 figures sat across from each other at a simple table, but the body language made it clear who was actually in control of the conversation. Han began telling stories about human history, Vextar said, his voice growing even quieter. Wars they had fought against each other before they reached the stars. Conflicts that lasted decades, sometimes centuries. He described battles where millions of humans died, strategies that involved entire populations, weapons that could destroy continents. Several cadets gasped at the scale Vextar was describing. Most galactic conflicts involved thousands of soldiers, not millions. But the worst part wasn't the numbers, Vextar continued. It was how casually Han talked about it all, like he was discussing the weather or sharing recipes. He explained human military philosophy, how they view conflict as a natural part of existence, how they study war the same way other species study art or music. The hologram showed Zeklos becoming increasingly agitated as the session continued, while Han remained calm and conversational. After 4 hours, we had to remove Zeklos from the interrogation room, Vextar admitted. He was having a complete psychological breakdown, convinced that humans were an unstoppable force that would eventually consume the entire galaxy. Our second interrogator lasted 6 hours before suffering similar effects. The commander's voice dropped to barely above, a whisper. Han was released the next day not because he escaped or because we exchanged him for our own prisoners. We let him go because keeping him was destroying the mental health of our entire facility staff. The retreat from Vega wasn't just a military withdrawal, it was something far more devastating. Commander Vextar pulled up holographic displays, showing star systems that looked like cosmic graveyards. Twisted metal floated in space, where once thriving stations had operated. Entire asteroid mining facilities sat silent and dark. This is what humans call scorched Earth, Vextar explained to his cadets. When Colonel Nam realized his forces couldn't hold these systems, he made a choice that still haunts our strategic planning today. The images shifted to show mining complexes with their cores deliberately overloaded. Massive excavation sites had been flooded with toxic chemicals that made the precious metals impossible to extract. Space elevators hung broken, their cables cut at precise points to create maximum debris clouds. But why destroy their own work? Asked a young officer, her tentacles curling in confusion. These were human colonies, human investments. Vextar zoomed in on a particular system, where a beautiful blue-green world had been turned into a wasteland. Because Nam understood something we didn't expect from such a primitive species, sometimes the greatest victory comes from ensuring your enemy gains nothing from their conquest. The water processing plants had been sabotaged with long-acting toxins. Agricultural centers were seeded with modified organisms that would contaminate soil for decades. Even the orbital habitats were rigged to break apart in ways that created permanent navigation hazards. Look at these shipping lanes. Vextar highlighted the space routes between planets. 30 years later, we still can't use them safely. The debris fields move unpredictably, and clearing them would cost more resources than building new routes entirely. The cadets studied images of ghost towns on planetary surfaces. Buildings stood empty but intact, yet every piece of useful technology had been removed or destroyed. Power generators were stripped of their fusion cores. Computer systems were wiped and their storage drives melted down. The humans didn't just retreat, Vextar continued. They transformed their former territories into strategic dead zones. We conquered empty shells that cost us more to occupy than they were worth. One cadet raised a questioning appendage. Surely some resources remained valuable. That's what we thought too. Vextar showed survey reports from the captured systems. Every mine we tried to reopen had been flooded with compounds that corroded our equipment. Every factory we attempted to restart had been subtly sabotaged. Even the residential areas had problems. Air recycling systems that worked for humans but poisoned our atmosphere. The most chilling image showed a massive industrial complex that looked completely normal from the outside. This weapons manufacturing plant appeared untouched when we arrived. Our engineers spent months trying to restart production before realizing every critical component had been replaced with nearly identical replicas that would fail catastrophically under operational stress. Colonel Nam turned retreat into a strategic masterstroke, Vextar concluded. He taught us that humans don't just fight for territory, they fight to deny territory. Even in defeat, they found ways to make victory hollow for their enemies. The cadets sat in uncomfortable silence, finally understanding why human military doctrine required such careful study. The silence in the war room was deafening. Every cadet sat frozen as Vextar's words sank in. The battles they'd just studied. The clever tactics, the devastating weapons, the scorched earth retreats, all of it had been labeled something else entirely in the captured human military files. Conventional warfare, Vextar repeated slowly, letting each word hang in the air. That's what their documents called everything we've discussed today. Not their most advanced strategies, not their deadliest capabilities, just routine military operations. A cadet in the back row made a soft clicking sound of disbelief. Another's breathing apparatus began working overtime as stress hormones flooded their system. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls were closing in. Our code breakers spent months translating their military databases, Vextar continued, his voice unusually quiet. We expected to find their greatest secrets, their most powerful weapons. Instead, we found training manuals, basic instruction guides for what they considered standard battlefield procedures. The holographic display shifted to show fragments of human text, military doctrine files that their linguists had painstakingly decoded. The words seemed innocent enough until you understood their context. Look at this phrase. Vextar highlighted a section. Rules of engagement. They had rules limiting how they could fight us, protocols that prevented them from using certain weapons, certain tactics. They were fighting us with restrictions we didn't even know existed. A senior cadet finally found her voice. What kind of restrictions? The kind that kept entire categories of weapons locked away in their arsenals. Vextar's display showed inventory lists from captured human military bases. The numbers were staggering, not just the quantities, but the classifications they'd never seen used in battle. Chemical weapons that could poison entire atmospheres, biological agents designed to target specific genetic markers, energy weapons that could crack planetary crusts, all sitting unused in their storage facilities while they fought us with what they considered acceptable force levels. The implications were terrifying. Every hard-fought victory, every tactical advantage they'd gained, every moment they'd felt they were pushing humanity to its limits, it had all been against an enemy that was deliberately holding back. We found references to something called the Geneva Conventions, Vextar explained. Ancient human agreements that limited how they waged war, even against non-human opponents. They were following rules that protected us from their own capabilities. A young officer's voice cracked as he spoke. They could have ended the war immediately? Not immediately, but... Vexitar paused, choosing his words carefully. Our strategic analysts believe they could have made continued resistance impossible within months rather than years. They chose not to. The room erupted in nervous chatter as the cadets struggled to process this information. Some species communicated through color changes that now flashed rapid sequences of alarm and confusion. Others made soft keening sounds that spoke of deep psychological distress. This is why we study human warfare, Vexitar said, restoring order. Not because they're our enemies, but because they're capable of being so much worse. The war didn't end with a final battle or crushing defeat. There were no desperate last stands or heroic sacrifices. Instead, it ended with a simple realization that changed everything both species understood about conflict itself. Our diplomatic corps made contact with human leadership, Vexitar explained, his voice carrying the weight of profound revelation. What we learned in those first peace talks shattered our entire understanding of warfare. The holographic display showed the meeting chambers where representatives from both sides had gathered. The humans sat calmly across from alien delegates, who were still processing the scope of what they'd discovered about their opponents. They called our conflict a limited engagement, Vexitar continued. To them, it was never total war. It was something closer to a military exercise, an opportunity to test tactics and refine strategies against an unknown opponent. A cadet's translator device struggled with the emotional undertones as she asked, "They were experimenting on us?" "Not experimenting," Vexitar corrected. "Training. Every battle we fought, every strategy we employed, every victory we celebrated, they were learning from it, adapting, improving their methods not just to defeat us but to become better at warfare itself." The peace negotiations had revealed something far more unsettling than simple military superiority. Human generals spoke about the conflict with an almost academic interest, discussing tactics and outcomes like researchers analyzing data from a controlled study. They kept detailed records of everything. Vexitar showed fragments of human after-action reports, not just casualty figures and resource expenditures, but psychological profiles of our command structure, analysis of our decision-making patterns, studies of how different species respond to various forms of pressure. The humans had been building a comprehensive database of alien military capabilities, not for conquest, but for understanding. They wanted to know how other species thought about war, how they approached strategy, how they reacted under stress. The armistice came when their negotiators made an offer. Vexitar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They proposed, sharing their military knowledge with us, teaching us their advanced tactics and strategies. The silence in the room was complete. Every cadet understood the implications immediately. They offered to make us better at fighting them, one officer breathed in disbelief. Because they weren't afraid of us becoming stronger, Vexitar nodded. They were confident that no matter how much we learned, they would always adapt faster, always innovate beyond whatever capabilities we developed. The peace treaty hadn't been signed out of exhaustion or mutual respect. It had been signed because continuing the war served no purpose for humanity. They'd learned what they wanted to learn about alien warfare capabilities. That's when we realized the truth, Vexitar concluded, his ancient eyes reflecting decades of hard-won wisdom. Humans don't make war to conquer territory or resources. They make war to perfect the art of making war itself. The old commander stood slowly, his final lesson complete. The peace has lasted 30 years because we finally understood our place in their calculations. We're not enemies to be destroyed. We're case studies to be preserved.